Wyoming Territory, 1883, the wind cut sharp through Casper as the train hissed and groaned to a stop, its steel wheels grinding over frost-bitten rails. Clara Whitlow stood stiff in her boots, gloved hands clenched around the handle of a worn carpetbag. Her dark wool skirt snapped in the wind, and her wide-brimmed hat did little to stop the cold from biting her cheeks raw. Her eyes, though, stayed locked on the passenger car's open door waiting. She had come all this way for him. The telegram had been brief, almost cold. "Come west. I am ready." Paul, her husband, missing from her life for nearly 2 years, had promised to send for her once he settled. Now the letter had come, and she had brought their children across plains and mountains to meet him at last. But no one stepped off the train. The conductor shouted names. Men greeted wives with hard embraces. A boy whistled and ran to his mother. But Clara stood alone, her son and daughter pressed to either side of her, their small fingers clutching her skirt. "Is Papa here?" asked Tessa, her voice small and hopeful. Clara crouched down, brushing hair from her daughter's cheek. "Not yet, sweet pea. Maybe he is on the next one." She did not believe it. Not really. Her husband had not come. The sun began to dip behind the western ridge, throwing long shadows over the station. A man in a brown duster with dust on his boots leaned against a post nearby. He had been watching quietly for a while, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. His horse stood tied at the edge of the platform. He stepped toward her. "You waiting for someone, ma'am?" His voice was warm, low, steady. Clara straightened slowly. "My husband," she said. "He sent for us. He said he would meet us here." The man looked toward the train, then back at her, his eyes steady. "You sure he meant Casper? This is the last stop out this way." She nodded. "He said Wyoming. He was working a ranch near Laramie." "I wrote back to confirm. He never responded." The cowboy looked down at the children. Thomas, the older one, barely 9, stood protectively in front of his sister. "Your little ones?" he asked. Clara's jaw tightened. "Yes." "I am deeply sorry," he said. "Name's Prescott Monroe." She hesitated before answering. "Clara Whitlow." Prescott tipped his hat. "That is a fine name." She gave a small nod, then looked away. The station started to thin out. The conductor packed up his clipboard. The air grew colder. "You got somewhere to stay tonight?" Prescott asked. "No," she said. "I was told my husband had a house, a place for us to stay. I have no one here." Prescott looked at the children again. Tessa leaned into her mother's skirt. Thomas stared at him with narrowed eyes. He knelt beside the boy. "You watch out for your ma, do you?" Thomas gave one short nod. Prescott stood. "There is a boarding house just up the road, but they will be full with the cattle men coming in. I got a small cabin a few miles out. Not much, but it is warm and there is food. You and the children can stay a night or two until you figure out what comes next." Clara's throat tightened. "I do not know if that would be proper." "I understand," he said, "but it is getting cold fast and those little ones need supper." "I will sleep in the barn." She looked at him, really looked. His coat was patchy in places, but clean. His voice did not push. His eyes were kind. "All right," she said softly. Prescott nodded. "Come on then. Horse can carry one of the children." "I got a wagon a little ways down the road." The ride out was quiet. Tessa dozed against her mother's shoulder, and Thomas stared out of the wagon, watching the dark hills roll past. Prescott led the horse on foot, glancing back now and again to check on them. The cabin was small but warm, with a fire already going. He laid out blankets, pulled beans and cornbread from a tin, and poured water to heat for tea. Clara sat at the table, her back straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "You said your husband worked near Laramie," Prescott said gently. "What did he do?" "Cattle," she said. "He had dreams of running his own land. Seems a lot of men do." She looked up quickly, but there was no mockery in his voice. "I believed him," she said. "He left after the war, said he would send for us once he built our home. I waited 2 years. Then the letter came." Prescott nodded. "You still believe he is alive?" "I do not know what to believe anymore." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, quiet as a breath, he said, "I will take care of you if you let me." She blinked. "I just mean, for now. Until you know what comes next." She looked down at her hands, then nodded once. That night she tucked her children into a bed by the hearth. When she turned, Prescott was already outside, unrolling a blanket in the barn. The next days passed steady. Clara helped with the cooking. Prescott chopped wood, repaired a broken door hinge. Thomas followed him around, watching everything. Tessa helped feed the chickens. Prescott never pushed. He never asked what she planned to do. He just made room for her to breathe. 4 days later, Clara stood at the edge of the field behind the cabin, watching the sun rise. Prescott walked up beside her, quiet. "I sent a rider down to Laramie," he said. "Asked around about your husband." Clara turned slowly. "They said he died last winter. Fever took him. He never changed the address on his land papers. No one knew how to reach you." Clara's knees buckled. Prescott caught her gently, held her steady. She did not cry. She only stood there, pressed against him, the truth sinking in. "He is gone," she whispered. "And I brought them all this way." "You did what you had to," Prescott said. "You kept them safe." She looked up at him. His face was close, his eyes full. "What do I do now?" He reached up, brushed a tear from her cheek with the back of his finger. "I will help you figure it out," he said. "Whatever you need." She stepped back, but her hand stayed in his. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not," he said. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "You and those children, you are not a burden, you are a blessing." She stared at him, heart pounding, and then he said it. Quiet but steady. "I will." Clara's eyes filled. Her lips parted, but no words came. Prescott took her hand gently, just holding it, no promises. No rush, just one man's vow, clear and true. The frost gave way to thaw 3 weeks after Clara arrived at the cabin. Snow melted slow along the fence posts, and the creek behind the barn ran louder each morning, pulling winter away with it. Crows called from the bare cottonwoods, and the pale sun lengthened its reach across the fields where new grass made a hesitant showing. Inside, the warmth from the hearth stretched far enough now that Clara could leave the bedroom door open. Tessa's cough, which had kept her up nights, was gone. Thomas had found a rhythm in his chores, and Clara no longer had to remind him to wipe his boots before stepping inside. The silence between her and Prescott had grown softer too, not empty, but unhurried. One morning, as she kneaded dough on the table, Clara glanced out the window and saw Prescott atop the ladder, hammering a new shingle into place. She opened the door. "You'll ruin your hand if you keep holding the nail like that." He looked down at her, eyes squinting against the light. "I reckon I can manage." She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out. "Might be you can, but you'll lose time when that thumb swells." He smiled with the side of his mouth. "You offering to take over?" "I'm offering to hold the ladder." He paused, then climbed down. "All right then, I won't argue with good sense." They worked in tandem, her grounding the ladder while he moved along the sloped roof. The morning passed without clatter or misstep. Only the steady knock of nails and the hush of breeze through the pines. Later, when she handed him a cup of coffee, he didn't sit. He stayed near the porch rail, one boot on the lower step. "You ever think on staying?" he asked, eyes still on the trees. She sipped, letting the warmth settle. "I think on a great many things. Most of them come and go. I'm not asking to corner you. I know." He glanced down at the ground. "It's just, you fit here." She turned her head slightly. "Fit isn't the same as belonging." "No," he said. "But it's the start of it." Inside, Tessa sang softly to herself while brushing her rag doll's hair. Thomas was at the back pens feeding the goats. The wind carried their small voices, the bleat of animals, the sharp scent of pine sap warming in the sun. "I don't know what I am without Paul," Clara said. "I was a wife for 10 years, a mother for nearly as long, but I haven't been just a woman in a long time." Prescott looked at her then. "I see a woman now." She met his gaze. There was nothing hurried in it, no urgency. Just steady warmth, like the first touch of spring after a long, cold stretch. That evening, Clara sat on the back stoop, mending a tear in Thomas's shirt. Prescott walked up from the creek, sleeves rolled, carrying a string of trout. "These'll fry up good," he said, laying them out on the bench. "I've never cleaned a fish," she admitted. "I'll show you," he said. "But you won't like the smell." She laughed softly. "I'll manage." They worked side by side, the sun dipping behind the ridgeline. When her hands hesitated at the entrails, Prescott reached over and guided her grip. "You're not squeamish," he said. "I'm learning," she replied. "That's all any of us can do." After supper, when the children were asleep and the fire burned low, Clara stood by the window. Prescott was outside, checking the latch on the barn door. She watched the way he moved, unhurried, certain. When he stepped back in, she spoke without turning. "I could take in mending, or help with calving if neighbors need. There's use in me yet." "There's more than use," he said. She turned now. "I'm not asking for anything you aren't ready to give," he said. "But I'd like to build something steady with you, brick by brick, if that's what it takes." She studied him, her face unreadable in the firelight. "I don't think I know how to start again. You already have." He reached out, palm up. She stepped forward, placed her hand in his. There were no grand declarations. Only the quiet weight of something beginning again, not in spite of what they'd lost, but because of it. She let his fingers close around hers. And in that stillness, with the wind low and the world quiet, Clara felt the first sure beat of belonging. Clara rose earlier than usual, drawn by a quiet restlessness she couldn't place. The cabin was still, the coals in the hearth casting a soft orange hush across the floorboards. She pulled on her shawl and stepped outside, the cold biting at her ankles where her hem didn't quite reach. The sky was pale and just beginning to warm at the edges, the ridgelines turning from slate to soft gold. Prescott was already at the corral, leading the bay gelding through a slow circle. He didn't see her at first. His posture was easy but focused, the lead rope loose in his hand. When he turned and caught her watching, he tipped his head but didn't speak. Clara stepped off the porch and crossed the frost-laced grass. "You take him out every morning, most," Prescott said. "He spooks if he goes too long without work. He reminds me of my brother's mule." "Stubborn but smart," Prescott let out a short breath. "He's better tempered than most men I've known." "I've known a few like that too." He stopped the horse, tying the rope loosely to the post. "You ever handle stock?" "My father raised sheep," she said. "I was the only one who could get the ram to follow a lead." "I believe that." He studied her for a moment. "You want to help me run the fence line today?" She hesitated. "Won't the children need watching?" Thomas said he wanted to try carving again. Tessa's got her dolls lined up for a lesson. "I think they'll be all right with me nearby and you just down the slope." "All right," she said. "If you're sure." They rode out together just after the sun cleared the ridge, following the fence line west toward the rocky bluff. The land opened wide out here, raw and quiet, the grass lying flat in the wind's path. Clara kept her eyes ahead, keeping pace beside Prescott as he rode a few lengths ahead, checking posts and wire. At one break in the line, he dismounted and crouched beside a post leaning half out of the earth. "Frost heave," he muttered. "Popped it loose." Clara handed down the mallet without being asked. "You've got a good eye," he said. "I learned to be useful early." He drove the post back into the frozen soil with a few hard strikes, then stood and stretched his back. "You always lived back east." "I was born in Missouri," she said. "We moved to Ohio after the war started. My father thought it would be safer." "Was it?" "Not for long." He didn't press her, just handed the wire back up and climbed into the saddle. They didn't speak again until they reached a small rise overlooking the creek. The horses drank while they sat on a fallen log, the bare branches above them clacking in the wind. "I never asked what brought you west," Clara said. Prescott ran a hand over his chin. "I was in Kansas after the war. Drove freight for a while. Wound up following a cattle drive out this way. Figured I'd stay where there was sky enough to breathe." "Did you leave someone behind?" He shook his head. "No, my folks were gone by then. Sister married a banker in St. Louis. She wrote once, said I was welcome if I ever wanted to sit still and read books all day." "Did you write back? Didn't seem worth the stamp." Clara smiled faintly. "I think I would have liked her, maybe." He looked at her sideways. "She'd have liked you." They sat quiet for a while after that. A hawk drifted overhead, casting its shadow long across the ridge. "Prescott," Clara said softly, "I don't know what this is between us, but I know it doesn't feel like something I have to carry alone." He turned, his expression unreadable. It's not. She didn't look away. I've spent years holding breath, waiting for a future to arrive on someone else's time. I don't want to do that again. You won't. He reached for her hand, slow and certain. She let him take it, his fingers wrapped around hers like they'd always belonged there. I want to stay, she said. If that's still what you're offering. He didn't speak right away. Just brought her hand to his chest and held it there over the quiet, steady beat beneath flannel and wool. It is, he said, and more than that, Clara, I want to build a life with you. One that doesn't wait on promises that never come, one that's ours. She leaned in, resting her head against his shoulder. I think I'm ready, she said. He nodded, his voice low. So am I. And in that pale morning light, with the fence repaired and the horses still grazing, they sat together in the hush between seasons, their hands clasped, their hearts no longer waiting. The first real warmth of spring brought a shift to everything. The ground softened, and the smell of damp earth hung in the air. Morning light slanted through the cabin windows earlier now, catching in Clara's hair as she stirred porridge on the stove. Tessa dragged a stool to the basin and washed her hands without being asked. Thomas had begun rising before dawn, pulling on his boots with quiet purpose and walking the fence line, a small coil of twine looped over his shoulder. Clara stepped outside with a bucket in each hand, heading toward the chicken coop. Prescott was already in the barn, his sleeves rolled, shoulders bent over the bench as he sharpened a blade. The rasp of metal on stone echoed softly, steady and sure. She didn't call to him, just watched from the path. He didn't glance up, but after a moment he said, "There's a pair of fox kits down near the creek. I saw their prints by the water this morning." Her brow lifted. "Will they come after the hens, if their mother's desperate enough?" She shifted the buckets in her grip. "I'll take the dog with me on egg gathering." He finally looked up. "You thinking of keeping watch tonight?" "I've gone without sleep for weightier things." Prescott wiped the blade and stood. "You shouldn't have to." She didn't answer that. Instead, she walked toward the coop, the dog loping behind her. Earth clung to her hem, and her fingers numbed against the metal handle, but she moved with quiet rhythm. That was how things were now, no talk of what had passed, only the work of building forward. That afternoon, she rode with Tessa to the neighboring ridge, where wild onions grew thick beneath the rocks. The girl talked about her doll's new name and asked if birds had birthdays. Clara listened, gently corrected the doll's grammar, and helped her daughter pull the onions free without snapping their roots. When they returned, Prescott was out back, splitting logs near the shed. He paused when he saw them. "Careful near that east slope," he said. "Snowmelts loosen the ground," Clara nodded. "We stayed west of the gully, the child's in one piece." Tessa beamed and lifted her apron to show the bundle of onions. He reached over and plucked one from the pile. "These'll stew up fine." That night, as the wind picked up and the trees moaned low around the cabin, Clara stood at the window, her arms folded. Prescott joined her quietly. "You hear that?" She tilted her head. "The trees?" "No, there's a weather shift coming." She looked at him. "You always know things before they happen." "Not always, just enough to stay out of trouble." She turned back to the glass. "I used to think I could see ahead too, make plans, know what was coming." "What changed? Everything." Prescott's voice came low. "You haven't let bitterness take root." "That's not nothing." She glanced at him. "I came close. Then you chose different." She didn't reply right away. Outside, the wind leaned harder against the boards and the fire in the hearth cracked. He reached for her hand. "You know I'm not going anywhere." She held his gaze. "I believe you." He brought her fingers to his lips, not rushed, not uncertain. Just quiet, as if the gesture had waited for the right night, the right wind, the right look in her eyes. She didn't pull away. Later, while the children slept and the fire settled low, Clara stepped outside alone. The air was sharp, but the sky was clear, stars scattered like thrown salt. She breathed in deep, the smell of pine, smoke, and promise filling her chest. The man who had whispered "I will" stood just inside the doorway, watching her with a calm that had nothing to prove. She turned to him and said, I want to build this place with you, not just stay, not just get by, he nodded once. Then we'll build it. And with the moon rising behind them and the night holding steady, Clara stepped back inside and left the door open behind her. The wedding was finished before the maples unfurled their leaves. Clara stood at the edge of the pasture, her hands resting in front of her, watching the last light of day settle behind the hills. The grass had grown green underfoot, and the creek behind the barn ran full now, swollen with meltwater and morning rain. Prescott came up behind her, his steps quiet in the soft earth. He stopped at her side, not touching her yet. She could feel the warmth of him there, steady as ever. "There's a nail loose on the gate," he said. "Thomas says he can fix it." She smiled without turning. "He probably can. I told him he ought to wait until morning. He said a man doesn't wait around when something needs doing." She finally looked at him. "That sounds familiar." Prescott's hand found hers, his thumb brushing the edge of her palm. "He's come into himself this spring." "They both have." Clara shifted, her voice quiet. "Tessa asked this morning if we were a real family now." He didn't answer right away. "What did you tell her?" "I said we always were." She looked up at him. "But now we're whole." Prescott didn't speak, only bent to kiss her forehead, then rested his cheek against her temple for a moment. The scent of him, wood smoke, horses, fresh cut hay wrapped around her in a way that felt like home. Inside the cabin, the children's voices rose as they argued over which storybook to read. Clara stepped through the door and called their names, the kind of soft warning that only a mother's voice could carry. They quieted immediately. Later, after the children were asleep and the fire burned low, Clara folded the last of the linens into the chest at the foot of the bed. She turned and found Prescott watching her from the doorway. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and find it was all something I imagined," she said. He crossed the room and took her hands in his. "This isn't something that flickers out." She searched his face. "You're sure?" "I've never been more certain." His voice didn't rise, didn't press. It simply settled into the room like a truth that didn't need proving. She stepped into him, arms slipping around his waist. "Then I'm not afraid anymore." Prescott leaned down, brushing his lips across hers, slow and reverent. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. "You never had to be." They lay down together that night in the narrow bed, the air still cool with spring's bite and the hush of the creek threading through the window. Clara curled against him, her hand resting on his chest. He covered it with his own. They didn't speak again, not until morning. Summer came on slow and golden. Tessa ran barefoot through the garden rows, her doll tied to her back with a piece of old cloth. Thomas rode with Prescott during the cattle drives that took them through the lower hills. Clara kept a notebook by the window and began sketching plans for a larger chicken run and a kitchen garden with herbs and late summer squash. One evening, a neighbor passed through with his daughter, a quiet girl with a thick braid and a gift for embroidery. Over supper, she offered to teach Clara a new stitch, and later asked if she might help with the wedding quilt Clara had begun. Prescott poured coffee for the neighbor and said, "We've got room enough for a few hands next month." "You tell your cousins they're welcome." After they left, Clara ran her fingers over the edge of the quilt frame. "You've made us part of something." "You did that," he said, brushing a straw from her shoulder. "I just gave the pieces a place to land." That night, Prescott brought out a small cedar box from beneath the bed. He opened it carefully and handed Clara a folded piece of paper. Her name was written across it in tidy, slanted script. She unfolded it, reading each line slowly. It was a deed land, filed and signed in Laramie under both their names. She looked up at him, startled. "You didn't have to, I wanted to," he said. "This land is yours as much as it's mine. Always was once you stepped foot on it." Clara placed the paper back in the box, then closed the lid with quiet finality. "Then this is where I'll stay." Prescott reached for her hand and she let him. Years passed and the cabin grew. Not larger by much, but stronger, with added beams and a wraparound porch. The chicken run doubled, the kitchen garden flourished, and the fence line held through snow and heat alike. Tessa grew into a tall, clever girl with ink-stained fingers and a mind for stories. Thomas took over the ranch by 22, steady and fair. He married the neighbor's daughter, the one with the braid and calm eyes. Clara and Prescott aged gently, their days folding into one another like turned pages. They still rode out in the evenings when the air cooled and the cattle settled, still sat beneath the cottonwoods at dusk, still held hands when no one was watching. On their 20th wedding day, Clara stood again at the edge of the pasture as the sun dipped low. Prescott joined her slower now, his hair gone silver at the temples. "You remember this spot?" he asked. "Every line of it." "I never thanked you for coming with me that day I offered to take you in." She turned to him, her smile soft. "You didn't take me in, Prescott. You made room beside you." He reached for her and kissed her, still slow, still certain. As the sky deepened to violet and the stars came out one by one, they stayed there, two figures in the field, the silence between them full of everything they'd built. And they were happy. Not the kind that flared or shouted, but the kind that settled deep, like roots after rain, steady, quiet, and sure. Always.